Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk to you about boosting your cash flow with research and development tax credits this afternoon. So to start, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who A4g Chartered Accountants are. So we're based in Kent, but and as you can imagine, now we've all mastered Zoom. We really can go anywhere. We're dedicated manage businesses, particularly those looking to grow, who just need that extra kind of advice and guidance on how to manage your money and how to actually make your dreams a reality. So whilst we're a medium-sized practice, we have a really key two-man approach to clients' affairs, and that means that you've people, so a principal advisor and a client manager that know your business and can really help drive forward the plans that you've set in place. So with a lot of the webinars, as we go through, I'm sure questions will pop into your mind. Feel free to pop them into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we'll have some time for that at the end. So I'm going to be joined this afternoon by my colleague Daniel Thompson. He is our in-house specialist for research and development. We've also got Mark and Paul, who are going to be talking to you about how to really protect your intellectual property using trademarks and patents. So we're looking forward to getting cracking. And then we've got Robert, who's going to talk to you about some of the little hidden ways we can fund some of this stuff. So research and development tax credits, what are they? Well, they're an incentive offered to limited companies for those that do things that change and improve processes, products or services. If you think about there might be things that you've done to adjust a process or a product that actually your competitors would love to steal. And it's a government initiative because they're really keen for UK businesses to grow and develop and be really innovative. So there's actually two R&D schemes. So the one that most of you will have probably heard of is the SME scheme for R&D. So most businesses, particularly a lot of our clients, qualify for that because they've got fewer than 500 staff and either a turnover of no more than 100 million euro, no more than gross assets of 86 million. So, predominantly most people fall under that camp, but if you don't meet the criteria above, there's another incentive. But we're going to talk to you about the SME scheme for R&D mainly this afternoon. So what do you gain under that? Basically what happens is whatever you have spent on qualifying projects, and they don't have to have been successful, but they may have to meet the conditions, they uplift the money you've spent by another 130%. And then you can either have a corporation tax reduction, or if you're a loss-making business, you can trade that for a cash repayment. So, if you're a new, it might help with some of that cash flow. So when can you make a claim? It's within 2 years of your accounting year end. So if I give you a bit of an example for that. So if you've got costs incurred up to the 30th of April 2019 year end, then you must have made the claim by the 30th of April 2021. So for a lot of people, you might not submit your company tax return for a year. So it's just important to keep a watch on those deadlines. Excellent. Well, I'm going to hand you over to Dan to talk about the intricate details of R&D.
To be eligible, firstly, you have to have spent some money on the qualifying project because, the tax incentive is related to that amount, and you have to be a limited company of any size, really. What sort of projects qualify? Well, it's quite broad. The legislation follows the BEIS's definition of R&D, which effectively says it's a project that looks to overcome uncertainty or an advancement in your industry. Now that can be whether something tangible or intangible. Something tangible such as a cleaning product that that has a better clean, or it can be something intangible such as gaining knowledge or creating efficiencies within your manufacturing process. You know, the industries can be very wide. You know, it can go from anything from software development to architecture and manufacturing. Now, obviously, there are a few main indicators of R&D. One is, have we created a new product that perhaps wasn't out there before? Have we significantly improved a product that's already out there? Now, this isn't kind of you're fine-tuning, you're tweaking. This is something that has expanded the underlying science or technology. Or have we created a manufacturing warehouse that creates this product quicker than any of our competitors, and our competitors want this? Yeah, if you could just go to the next slide, because I think we just covered that. And cost. There is no minimum spend required. I mean, obviously, the more you spend, the more tax relief, but there is no minimum. Now, the things to consider, you have to kind of present to HMRC that you've met 4 conditions. Recently worked on a few projects from varied industries. One was a car leasing company, and they actually developed a software that would speak with both Ford, the car manufacturer's software, to the brokers and the leasing companies. And, you know, this meant, you know, created efficiencies within their industry because, you know, on the road prices, stock details were accessible to pretty much everyone in the industry, where it was all done manually before. Had one for cleaning, going back to cleaning actually, where it was to clean copper, but it was required that it kind of wanted to create a rustic look. But obviously, if you clean copper, it becomes shiny. So they actually developed a material or a cleaning product that kind of cleaned it, but made it look dated and rustic. And then finally, I mean, you know, kind of a vet firm where they were adapting human medicines for use on animals. Now, the one that I'm going to focus on here was actually an architect firm. So they were kind of overseeing the construction and design of a building, a large building. You know, they work on mansions and public buildings, and it was becoming a more regular occurrence, if you will, that their clients were saying, well, we want it manufactured out of this material, this stone. But these materials are becoming more scarce, more expensive, pretty much quarried to extinction. So what they did was they kind of they created a mix. So they used less of the natural material, but it still gave off the same effect. So here we presented to HMRC that the advancement was the reduce of the natural resource while still maintaining the same look. And the uncertainty is, well, would it survive the exposure to the elements? Does it look identical? Is this economically viable? And can we shape it as required? And then we had to show, well, how are they overcome? Now, obviously, trial and error, different mixes, and then rigorous testing, if you will, on its durability. And then lastly, you have to say, well, why can every person in your industry do this? Perhaps there isn't a need previously. Perhaps no one needed it before, but, you know, tastes are changing or requirements are changing, and it is now needed. Perhaps it's timing, economic resources, it could be a variety of things. So HMRC will allow for eligible costs. That can be materials, it can be subcontractors, it can be salaries, and an allocation of the utilities and premises costs of the business. You know, if the R&D uses 20% of the floor space, then you know you can have 20% of the costs. What costs do not qualify? You can't claim for the market research. Any sort of minor tweaks, you know, if you're not actually changing the underlying technology, but you're just changing the aesthetics, you can't claim for that. You can't actually claim for electricity, and you can't claim for administrative time, although any proportion of the time that is to do with the R&D, you know, whether that's processing the R&D costs onto the system, then you can claim for that, albeit it won't be a lot. So how much you can save, if we take a figure of £50,000, and that in effect is the money that you've spent on this project until it becomes technically feasible. So at the point in which it becomes feasible, you can't claim for anything more. So you uplift that by 130%, which equates to £65,000. And ordinarily, HMRC would give you your tax relief on your £50,000. In this case, it will give you a tax relief on £50,000 plus an additional £65,000. So it actually works out, you know, quite a lucrative claim to make to HMRC. Now, in this case, that's an extra £12,000 on a £50,000 spend that you could make under R&D if you make the claim and HMRC accepts it. Now, a lot of firms who carry out R&D might not yet be in a profitable position. You know, the startup firms where naturally, obviously, costs outweigh their income, and HMRC allow, in that case, for them to actually give you a cash repayment rather than offsetting it against your tax bill. This is a reduced rate of 14.5% as opposed to your 19% that you'd ordinarily get, but it is still, you know, lucrative. And at the end of the day, if you need that now, a lot of people opt for it. So. Now, there's been a lot of discussion in the industry recently. Legislation states that the SME scheme is what's called notified state aid, but so are the bounce back loans and the coronavirus loans that the government have allowed many businesses to take. The industry is kind of yet to see what HMRC's reaction will be to that. But in theory, if you've got both, then you would have to claim under the Ardex scheme and not the SME scheme. You know, however, if you get the bounce back loan and you keep it completely separate from the R&D expenditure and the R&D project, then HMRC have no right to argue that you use the bounce back loan, the notified state aid, on that R&D project, and therefore you should be able to claim the SME scheme. Now, if I quickly touch on the Ardex scheme, effectively, rather than uplifting your cost by 130% and then giving you the tax relief on that, you just get a flat 13% credit of all your costs. It actually works out about a third as lucrative as the SME scheme. So, you know, it's quite an important step to take if you've potentially got a research and development claim already, and you've got a bounce back loan. It's just something that you might want to consider. Now I'm going to pass you back to Emma.
Thanks, Dan. So hopefully we've got you the sort of clogs going, and you start to think about some of the things that you've done probably as almost like a natural part of what you may do, of just wanting to, you know, deliver what you can to your customers, even if your customers are asking for some quirky things. Quite often there's this thought process and some trial and error that might go into some of the stuff that you're doing, which to you is good customer service, but actually may well qualify for research and development. So you've started having to think about these things. So what do you do next? So we work with a lot of clients and even external businesses. The process we would go through is we would conduct a free discovery session with one of our R&D specialists, just to identify the likelihood of a successful claim. So we will just run through all the criteria with you, and some of the things that you've been thinking about, and just talk through what you've been doing over the last couple of years for your clients and within the business. And then if we're all happy that there's going to be a successful claim, we'd obviously agree the fees with you and produce a technical report that would include like a timeline and a profile, and it really explains all the innovation that you've done and summarises the costs, breaking those down with the potential tax saving. And then all that gets pulled together and we submit like an amended tax return to HMRC to say, here you go, here's all the information, this is why we think we're eligible. And then, you know, under normal circumstances, it was kind of 4 to 6 weeks, and a refund would be issued. It's taking slightly longer at the moment, but the way we present everything is quite a clear case. It helps speed up the process. So part of that might involve having to amend a company tax return, but that's no problem. So what I would say is, if any of you think that you are qualifying for R&D, or you're not going to talk to someone a bit more about the conditions, feel free to book a meeting with us. Dan and my email are both on there.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Mark Hiddleston. I'm a trademark attorney with the firm of Hiddleston Trademarks, and basically I assist clients with trademark protection, not only in the UK, but also worldwide. I'm also what's called a trademark litigator. So hopefully you would never fall into this issue, but if you do end up in a trademark litigation dispute, I can also assist you before there's an IP specialized court called the Intellectual Property Enterprise Court, or IPEC for short. Now, my part of this talk will be to run through trademark protection and to give you some idea how to protect that, what are trademarks, and also how to hopefully avoid infringing some third parties' trademark rights. Obviously, this is one of the intellectual property rights, and Paul will follow on with hopefully more information on IP generally after my part of the presentation. Now, why is this important? Well, firstly, if, as Dan and Emma have been saying, you do conduct some form of R&D and or research and development, you may well develop a new product or service as part of the results of that R&D. And you may want to adopt a new trademark in relation to that, or both the product or potentially for the services. Virtually every business in any event in the UK and probably worldwide uses at least one trademark, i.e. its name, in relation to its business. Many, in fact, use a considerable larger number of trademarks, and in fact, many use more than one trademark in relation to the same product. Now, my experience, sadly, is that many smaller companies are not that familiar with what trademark rights they have and how to protect them. And sadly as well, it is very easy for the unwary to fall into the trap of infringing third-party rights. To give you an example, sadly, many years ago, I remember we acted for a recruitment agency which was handling a perfectly legitimate business and had been doing so for a significant number of years. But unknown to them, a third party had been using as a recruitment agency a very similar mark in another part of the country. The end result was that that entity registered their trademark and then approached our client. And after some correspondence, the end result was that our client had to change its name, its trademark, with not inconsiderable expense and inconvenience. So the one thing I want to leave you with from my part of this presentation is it is really important, really important for any small business, any successful business, to know what trademarks it's using, how to protect them, and how also to avoid infringing third-party rights. Now, one point I should start with here is that you should also realize that trademark rights are national in basis, and the law and practice in relation to trademarks can vary considerably from country to country. And that may be relevant if you are involved in exporting from the UK to other territories, and I'll come into that in more detail later. But in relation to the UK, there are two ways of protecting your trademarks. First one is, as on the slide, common law rights in passing off. You don't actually need to register a trademark. You can, in court proceedings, if you can establish that you have a reputation and goodwill in your trademark, you can prevent the use of an identical or similar mark where you can establish likelihood of confusion between the respective marks. The second route, and the preferred and recommended route, is trademark registration. And that means filing a trademark application at the Intellectual Property Office, or the IPO for short, which is based in Newport in Wales. Now, why is it recommended to rely on trademark registrations? Well, the sad truth is that relying on common law rights in passing off is somewhat hit and miss. You can rely on them, but if you go to court in a passing off action, you will have to file substantial evidence to show that you have acquired goodwill and reputation, which means filing large numbers of witness statements from third parties and providing evidence of your promotional advertising material for a significant period of time. And then it's up to the court to decide whether you've overcome the initial hurdle of establishing goodwill. And if you haven't, your case will fail. Now, passing off rights in filing that evidence in any event is expensive, and passing off right claims are notoriously expensive before the courts. Secondly, the extent of your common law rights really depends upon the extent of reputation geographically you can establish in the UK. So if you've only traded, for instance, in Orpington or Ashford, your common law rights in passing off will be restricted to that area. And it's quite possible that a third party may be using or start to use your identical mark in another part of the country, and you would not be able to prevent them. And in addition, they may acquire their own common law rights in passing off. And if you then subsequently expand your business to try and trade in that area, you may find yourself blocked. So there are significant potential advantages to trademark registration. The first one, and a very important one, is that it's a monopoly right. And what I mean by that is, Paul will tell us later, with some rights like copyright, you need to establish a secondary issue of copying. That doesn't apply in relation to trademarks. You can stop somebody using another mark if you can establish that the mark is identical or similar, and that their use is in relation to identical or similar services, and there's a likelihood of confusion. And secondly, it's a nationwide right. So even though your use may be, when you start out, restricted, say, potentially to say Orpington or Ashford or another town, but you're intending to expand your use, it gives you a breathing space, because you will be able to expand your use and still in the interim prevent third parties using that mark in another part of the UK. In UDR proceedings, if you get involved in a dispute in relation to domain name, if a third party tries to trade off your reputation in your trademark, it's a prerequisite of taking action that you have some form of trademark right, which really means in a lot of circumstances basically a trademark registration. You can, as some of you may know, you can issue a complaint on various online retail sites such as eBay and Amazon to take down infringing goods which are conflicting with your trademark, but it's a prerequisite of those actions that you have a trademark registration. Note in addition, another important factor is that you don't actually have to have commenced use when filing a trademark application. You get a 5-year grace period before you have to commence use. So if you're still involved in R&D, you can file your application, get that registered and protected while you're still going through this development stage of getting the product ready for launching. And a note as well that the downside as well, the negative side to this is that if you don't register, a third party could apply to register. And as we've seen from the example with the recruitment agency, they may end up in a situation where you are in a much weaker position and they can even stop your use in certain circumstances. You can oppose a trademark application based upon your prior trademark registration. And indeed, the IPO is likely to notify you of the prior, the subsequent application. You can oppose based upon common law rights in passing off, but the danger there is, again, you'll still need to establish your goodwill and reputation, and the IPO might not find in your favor on that point. And secondly, you may not pick up on the existence of the later application, and it may go through to registration and put you in a weaker position. One point I think Paul will flag up as well is that trademark registrations are also an asset. And if it comes to the stage at some point in the future that you decide to sell your business, for instance, one of the points that the potential purchaser may ask is, have you protected your trademarks? Are they registered? They are assignable. They can be sold separately from the business potentially. You can license them. And indeed, if you need to raise funds, you can also use them for security. You can record a charge against them. I should also point out as well, in the franchising field, if you're interested in franchising your mark, the trademark, which is commonly the case, is a part of that franchise package, it is really important that you have a trademark registration. And I really would strongly recommend that you don't undertake negotiations with a potential franchisee unless you've at least got a trademark application underway. So what is a trademark? Basically, it's anything that's capable of distinguishing your goods and services of your business from those of a competitor. It's normally a word or a logo, but it can be an element of 3D design. It can be, for instance, the Spirit of Ecstasy that Rolls-Royce use on their radiator grills is the classic example. But it could also be elements of packaging. For instance, the Toblerone bar has managed to be registered. So it can be the shape of the product or the packaging. You may be interested to note that there are unusual marks which have obtained registration. It can be a sound, a smell, or even a gesture. Asda has obtained registration for the gesture of tapping a back pocket in relation to retail services. Evian has registered the shape of their mineral water bottle, and even Tarzan is not exempt from trademark law. Although in reality, those sorts of marks are quite rare. Now, you've adopted your mark, you've come up with a new mark and you're going to launch it. One thing I wanted to leave you with is it's important that you can consider before launching availability searches. Some people will conduct due diligence by conducting internet searches to see who else is out there. But as we've discussed, a trademark registration does not have to be used for a period of 5 years, and that will not pick up where there's a registered trademark which could prevent your use, but has not yet been brought into use. Now, we can advise you and help you and conduct availability searches for you. Another point that we can help you with, we can give you some advice in terms of what would be protectable. Now, there's a few tips on this, general tips that we can use. And I'm talking at this from a trademark lawyer's perspective. Obviously, commercially, you may take a different decision, but it helps to be aware of some of the pitfalls. Invented words are the best trademark. They're the most eminently protectable. Kodak is the classic example of that. Also, words which may have some meaning, but not directly descriptive in relation to your products and services are also eminently protectable. Amazon, for instance, in relation to retail services for books. Marks to steer clear of or to be cautious with are those that are descriptive of your products or services. Now, if that's the case, they're going to be difficult to register potentially and also to protect. Again, geographical names can be a problem. They are registrable, but it's difficult to stop third parties using a geographical place name in relation to indicate where their goods and services came from. So things like Granada or Leon for Seat are potentially registrable, but you may still hit problems down the line. Surnames are also registrable. but equally, it's not easy to stop a third party using their own name in relation to their goods and services. So for instance, WH Smith is registrable, but it would be difficult to stop a newsagent whose name was Wilfred Herbert Smith, for instance. Numerals and letters are also potentially registrable, but you need to be careful because if they have some significance, perhaps as a catalogue number, they can be difficult to protect. And terms like A1 or A+ are also difficult. Now, once you've got your registration, it normally takes about 5 or 6 months if there's no major problems. That's not the end of the story. You do need to renew a trademark registration every 10 years. Obviously, we can help you with that. The other big thing, as I say, is you need to use it or lose it. And by that, as I say, you need to have brought the mark into use after 5 years. And if you don't, the third party can cancel your registration. It's also possible it's important to actively police your trademarks as well. If you turn a blind eye and allow a third party to use a mark close to your own, that will erode or dilute your rights over time and make it more difficult to stop someone else when it really matters. And again, we can give you advice in relation to that. Setting up a watch service to monitor what other applications are being filed for marks close to your own is an important adjunct to that. And again, we can help you with that. It's always useful as well to mark your products to indicate that you're claiming rights in the trademark. R in a circle indicates the mark is registered. You shouldn't use it for a mark which is not registered. It's actually a criminal offence, but you can use the TM symbol. One final tip as well, if you are lucky enough to come up with a totally new product for which there is no current name, the temptation is to use your trademark as the name of the product. It's better to come up with a generic name and to combine it with the trademark. Hoover vacuum cleaner, Dyson vacuum cleaner. If you or if the customers over time are educated to understand your trademark as just simply the name for the product, you will ultimately lose rights in your trademark. And set out on that slide are examples of marks which were registered and are now simply the name for the relevant product. Heroin, I hadn't realized, was a registered trademark at one point. The final point I wish to cover on this section is, again, as I mentioned before, trademark rights are national in basis. So even if you have a UK trademark registration, if you get to the stage of exporting from the EU, bear in mind that you may infringe a third party's rights. We can help you conduct searches. If you're launching into a major market, we can conduct searches for you to see that you don't infringe a third party's rights in another jurisdiction. You should also consider registering overseas in those circumstances. You can file nationally, but there are a few filing systems which are very cost effective. One of which is the European Union Trademark or EUTM system, which gives you protection across the EU. Again, we can help you with this. There is also a thing called an international registration under the Madrid Protocol, which allows you on a cost-effective basis to obtain protection in up to 100 countries worldwide. It covers most of North America, most of Europe, significant parts of the Far East, significant parts of Africa, but there are important gaps, such as, for instance, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and a number of countries within South America. Now, the final area I want to cover here is Brexit. There are a large number of transitional issues which occurred in relation to IP generally in relation to Brexit. One of the key ones I want to cover here is the EUTM, which I've just mentioned. This used to cover the UK, and many UK businesses registered an EUTM on their own rather than filing separately for a UK registration because it covered both the UK and EU. Now, since the end of the Brexit transition period, the EUTM no longer covers the UK. But the good news is that the UK IPO created a UK right equivalent to a registered EUTM. But it did not create any rights in relation to a pending EUTM application. So if you have a pending EUTM application, you have a 9-month period up to 1st of September in which you can file a new UK application claiming the details and the filing date from the EUTM application. That's all I want to cover on trademarks. The final thing I want to just briefly raise, if it's okay with you, Amanda, is funding. Bear in mind that there are various funding opportunities available. Firstly, if you're a very small business, there's a government startup loan package of up to £25,000. More IP related, and this could be useful to you, is the IBO has what's called an IP Audit Plus initiative, which allows you to obtain funding of up to about £3,000 for an IP professional such as myself or Paul to review what IP you've got and advise you in relation to how to protect that. And finally, there is also an IUPO SME fund. Now, you need a base within the EU. So if you have a division in the EU, this might be relevant, which gives funding for filing EUTM applications. Now, that's all I want to say here. What I'm going to do now is pass over to Paul, to Paul if he's back on. I don't know, Paul, if he's there.
Okay, yeah, apparently I am back again.
Brilliant, Paul, well done.
Has restored me to life. So let's see if we can do this again, all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Right, so let's see if I can share my screen this time. Okay. Right, I hope you can hear me this time. Slightly backwards in terms of presentation, what is intellectual property? Since you've already had a presentation about trademarks, which is one version of intellectual property. It's a suite of legislation and international conventions and treaties, which allows the products of your imagination, the abstract concepts, to be treated as if they were property. Mostly what these does is constrain the commercial use of the information that's created in that way. Just briefly, what is a patent attorney is, I'm sure Mark's already mentioned what a trademark attorney is. Patent attorneys are lawyers, but we all start with at least one honours degree in a STEM subject. So we actually talk technology. My particular degree is in mechanical engineering. Other people have chemistry, biochemistry, computer science, a whole range of things. We're regulated by, in fact, the same regulator as Mark, IP Reg, and in our case also the European Patents Institute, because most of us are both chartered patent attorneys, which is the United Kingdom version of the profession, and we're also usually European patent attorneys, which basically qualifies us to represent our clients before the European Patent Office. We're generally skilled and knowledgeable about not just patents, but the other varieties of intellectual property, and many of us are also trademark attorneys. What's the importance of intellectual property? As Mark's already mentioned, it essentially allows you to control the production of your new and innovative products in some way, and bearing in mind the way in which the actual production process takes place very frequently these days, where a product is developed in the United Kingdom, manufactured in China and sold potentially all over the world. That is actually quite a critical thing, because in the process of instructing your Chinese or for other manufacturer, you are going to tell them the details of precisely how to make your product. And you are, if you don't have intellectual property, completely reliant on them being honest and honorable in how they actually deal with that. So having intellectual property, things like patents, registered designs and unregistered designs, and indeed trademarks and other matters, allows you to have much better control over how your product is made and where it is sold and how it is sold and what for and by whom. It's also, as Mark's mentioned, a financial asset. It's property, so it belongs to you and or your business, and can be helpful in raising finance. For example, if you're looking for financial partners, they may well take a lien on your patents, your registered designs, your trademarks, and so forth, and indeed copyright assets. It can be a revenue source. If you own intellectual property, it can be licensed, and some of the world's largest businesses rely to a very great extent on licensing their assets. For example, Microsoft licenses its copyright in its in these software products, you never buy a copy of Microsoft Office, you buy a license to use their product. It can facilitate things like second sourcing. If you are in a business-to-business relationship and your customer requires a second source for security, you can facilitate that by means of licensing your IP. It facilitates partnering. One of the myths around patents in particular, and other kinds of IP as well, is that it's all about exclusivity. It's not. It actually allows you to put your cards on the table and disclose what it is you know in terms of your amazing new product, your amazing new software, your amazing new chemistry, where particularly, as is commonplace these days, you only own an aspect of what's necessary to make a great product. A great example of that, for example, is the mobile phone. It's thought there's something like 10,000 patents relate to the technology in any single mobile phone. Those patents are owned by many different players in the marketplace, and without those patents, they couldn't bring those products together in a way which results in the sorts of products you see. Controlling manufacturing and distribution, and at least in some jurisdictions, patents, at least in certain other IP, can result in a tax relief known as patent box, which can reduce your corporation tax consequent upon products which are covered by a patent to as little as 10%. Patents for inventions are basically about the functionality of a new product. So this runs into the R&D tax credits issue, because if you're developing something which isn't purely software and excluded from patentability as a result, and that's an issue you should always ask a patent attorney about. Anything that's actually patentable as a result of research and development is probably going to qualify as an R&D tax credit as a result of the tax credit, simply because to be patentable, your invention has to be new and inventive. It does not require new science. In fact, it very, very rarely will. The key factors involved in something like this, your invention has to be secret when your patent application is filed. The issue here is, in patentees, your invention has to be novel or new, but for these purposes, think secret. It's also got to be inventive, a little bit clever, above and beyond a totally routine development. And therein lies a key aspect of, if the Patent Office examiners have said your invention's new and inventive, it will probably meet at least some of the qualifications for R&D tax credits. One of the arguments I hear from time to time about, it's not worth me patenting something, is that defending a patent is actually too expensive. And it's usually the case that the party concerned is only thinking of their situation right now, when they're a startup business, and as usual with startup businesses, they're short of money. They're not thinking in terms of what's it going to be like 5 or 10 years down the line, when hopefully my business is a great success and making lots of money, and defending your patent may not be so much a case of it's too expensive as it's a complete no-brainer necessity. It's also less expensive than most people think, although it is nonetheless expensive. And most patent litigation is settled out of court. Very little actually ever makes it to court, and usually only when there is either a very great deal of money involved, or there are issues, quite credible issues, over the validity of patents. The process for getting a patent usually starts, informally at least, with some research. Potentially even before you have a solution to the problem, but primarily, is the solution that I've come up with, the solution being the technical invention, actually new and inventive and capable of industrial application? Well, that step the initial part of the process would be to consult a patent attorney, and normally you'll get some free advice to begin with as to whether or not your invention might be patentable. But the actual research which goes on would be looking at databases of existing patents and other public disclosures to see what the state of the art is, and whether or not there is sufficient difference between your invention and the state of the art to make the prospects of securing a granted patent credible. If that conclusion is probably yes, then the next step would be the preparation of a specification. That's a detailed description of the technology which goes into your invention in sufficient detail to be enabling to a person skilled in the art. So you have to have something which where you can actually provide a formula, a detailed process. Filing can cost anything from nothing whatsoever if you do it yourself. And some patent attorneys, myself included, will prepare a specification for you so you can go and file it yourself. Up to £3,000 to £5,000, depending on precisely how it's filed. You then get an official search from the Patent Office and an examination report. That may raise issues referred to as deficiencies or objections to the grant of your patent, and you get an opportunity to attempt to remedy those in writing and possibly even in verbal hearings. And if that's successful, your patent goes to grant. That's a very simplified description of how most patent offices operate. Other countries have different procedural details, but usually the process would be that you file a patent application in the UK first, possibly in the European Patent Office. And if that proceeds favourably, you would then go on within a year of your initial filing date to file in other countries, if that seems to be commercially worthwhile to you. Usually you'd use the same specification or something marginally altered from that in order to file in those other countries. One of the points to bear in mind is patents are a source of information, and it's a free source of information for most purposes. Patents are published usually within 18 months of initially being filed. They are available as a source of information on a number of databases, including Espasnet, PatentScope, and PatFT. There are others, but these are the most popular English language ones. And anybody can actually access those who's got access to the World Wide Web. They are very large collections of information and solutions to problems which people have actually sought to publish. As such, if you're starting out trying to find a solution to a technical problem within your business, I would earnestly urge most of you to look for what solutions have actually been presented on in other patent applications by other actors on those databases, is in order to avoid reinventing the wheel. Registered designs are another version of intellectual property. Unlike patents, which are directed at the functionality of a process, product, or system, a system being a combination of products and processes, registered designs are exclusively addressed to the appearance of usually a consumer product. So examples I've given up here includes cars, jewelry, furniture, graphical user interfaces, patterns of wallpaper, a large spectrum of things. One of the reasons they've become particularly popular recently is they've become relatively quick and easy to get through to grant, frequently in a matter of days or weeks, unlike patents, which will usually take at least months and usually years to get to grant. And blatant infringement of a registered design is now a criminal offence, which causes the retailing platforms, be they Amazon, eBay, or other major retailers, considerable concern because as a retailer of a product which is alleged to infringe a registered design, they're potentially complicit in that criminal offence, and they will usually withdraw the product and the advertisement from sale on their sites. That can often be conclusive. It's also well worth considering if you have a new product which is subject, which is a consumer product and which has some design attributes to it. If you don't register your own designs, I've encountered cases where other actors have registered your design, which can cause you a great deal of problems. While that registration will not be valid in law, it can be a very expensive and time-consuming process to have that registration removed. And in the meantime, you can be blocked from advertising on the platforms I've just mentioned. Know-how and confidential information is not, technically speaking, an intellectual property. It's more of a contractual obligation, but it does allow you to control the dissemination of information so long as it can be kept secret. And that potentially could even include things like computer code when it's encrypted in a product, and a matter to bear in mind when you are seeking to protect your product from unauthorized copying and reproduction. Okay, I think that concludes my presentation.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. My name's Robert Edge. I work for the Haven Gateway Partnership, and I'd like to thank A4g for inviting me today. The iConstruct project that I'm predominantly talking about is a business support project predominantly for the construction sector and the construction supply chain. It's aimed at supporting productivity improvements in the construction and built environment sector, and it's delivered by us, focused on businesses in Kent, Essex and East Sussex. We're also able to support SME businesses who currently serve other business sectors to access the construction and built environment sector. The project has got a number of elements. Firstly, we have the networking platform where we'll be arranging for external experts to talk about opportunities like BIM, modular construction techniques, construction logistics, as well as organising Meet the Buyer webinars. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, A4g presented on the domestic VAT reverse charge in construction. We literally managed to get that webinar done sort of 2 working days before the changes came in. Ultimately, we want to move, so the project's got 3 elements. As I said, we want to move towards a bigger mix of face-to-face networking as well as digital as soon as the COVID restrictions permit. But we've got a number of interesting topics coming up that you can have a look at our website, www.iconstruct.org.uk. The next areas where we can support is that we offer either 9 hours mentoring by industry experts who've got expertise in discipline such as carbon accounting, BIM, and for companies seeking to expand in the sector, experience of both running SME construction firms as well as operating divisions of major construction blue chips who can perhaps guide them on what the major construction firms are looking from SME suppliers. Or alternatively, what we can also offer is what we call a 30% match funded grant of between £1 and £20,000 of a 30% innovation rate. So in other words, we'll pay 30% of the cost of a particular project, and the client will pay 70%. We're also building a construction innovation hub in Essex, which has been designed to BREEAM excellent standards and opens in the summer, which will be a demonstrator for construction techniques as well as building industry management technologies. I don't want to take too much of your time up because I realise you've had 3 very content-heavy presentations, but what I'm happy to answer questions, and those are my details. You can find out more about iconstruct.org.uk on our website. You can contact me, and we've got plans to do some further webinars on different topics for the construction sector with A4g, who are actually members of our network now. So I've got no further slides. Amanda said to me, you know, we'll squeeze you in quite quickly, but you've got a couple of minutes, and I think I've just about kept to time. Thanks very much for your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for everyone for bearing with us, and to Paul, Robert and Mark for their really, really interesting presentations. So hopefully you've found it all really useful. We're going to open up quickly to some question and answers, and we'll try and sort of go through those quite quickly, but if you've got anything you want to ask, just pop an answer. So we've got a few for Dan on the R&D side. If I've already submitted my corporation tax return, can I still claim?
Yeah, as long as it's within the 2-year frame, you can submit as an amended tax return. Yeah, so yeah.
And how do HMRC go about checking claims, and what gets submitted?
Effectively, you know, the calculation is kind of down to yourself. You submit a kind of overview of that. You don't submit a full breakdown, and normally you'd submit a case file, which is pretty much recommended in all cases, basically showing the 4 criteria that I went through earlier, and then you enter on your tax return. I hear that they have about 10 to 15 minutes to review a case file, and then it's up to them to then grant it or not.
Yeah, I think our motto, isn't it, is that if you do the case file, it makes it look considered and careful, whereas if you were to just stick a number on the tax return, you know, that doesn't quite look as considered. And there may be some science behind it, but actually, if you're confident with your claim, putting that case file with it just shows really how confident you are. And we've got another question about, can I claim for my pension costs if I put those through my company, which I think is always it's always a tricky one, isn't it? R&D and sort of directors that are on small salary and dividends. Yeah.
So staff costs, it's all eligible costs. If it's your director's pension, I'm assuming you're referring to, you know, putting in 40 grand or whatever it is, you can claim that. The legislation states as long as it's paid within the project time frame, then it's fine. Interpretation of paid is disputed, whether it means incurred or actually paid physically. But yeah, in effect, yes, it can.
And I think we've got one here for Paul that says, if I have a patent or design in the UK, can I stop someone making my product in, say, France or China?
In short, no, but the UK patent will stop another party importing from France or China. So really, if you want to stop actions extraterritorially, you've got to have a patent in that country. But importing is an infringement of a patent in the UK. The same thing would be for copyright, trademarks, or registered designs.
Fantastic. And there's one that's sort of linked to that. It says, I've heard that Chinese patents are not worth the cost. Like, what's your opinion? Is to sort of have a patent in China?
Actually, they're well worth the cost these days. One, they aren't terribly expensive to get with world scale of things. I mean, by comparison with, say, Europe, which will probably cost you at least £20,000, a Chinese patent you're probably going to get for about £5,000. But the key factors are that Chinese law has updated, and in fact is updating again this year. China is very determined to become a technically developed first world country, and to do that it recognises that it's got to respect intellectual property in the same way that Europe or the United States or other developed countries do. So their enforcement of patents is actually becoming quite rigorous, and it's actually quite quick. The biggest question tends to be over damages rather than whether or not they're enforceable.
Fantastic,
That
thank
scale
you.
of damages, which is still low by comparison with other countries.
Okay, excellent. I think we've got one for Mark here that says, if I have a descriptive trademark, will I have any protection for this?
Yeah, potentially you will do. I mean, it's again, you know, how descriptive is the mark in question, but lots of people do use them. You would potentially have rights, common law in passing off, even if you don't have a trademark registration, if you could establish exclusivity through your use over time that the public associate that mark with you. Again, with trademarks, you can file an application on the basis of what's called acquired distinctiveness, which means that you can file evidence showing your use, and that again the public are beginning to, or the customers are beginning to associate that mark, or have associated that mark with you. The problem is it's again hit and miss. It takes time to gather the evidence. It will be more expensive, and it depends on how much weight the IPO puts to that. Another practical issue is the extent of use. So if you only trade in a part of the UK, you may hit problems in establishing that you can show a requisite level of distinctiveness across the whole of the UK.
Excellent, thank you. And then someone's asked, how much does sort of the trademark registration process cost?
It's actually not that expensive at all, provided you don't hit. The big thing is to avoid any form of objection or opposition, and that's partly doing your due diligence, doing searches in advance. But the whole process normally takes about 5 to 6 months from filing the application, and it will cost about £500 to £600 plus VAT to get the whole thing through to registration. If you hit an opposition, that's where the costs start racking up. And also there will be delays. It can take 12 to 18 months before you get a final decision on the opposition.
Fantastic, thank you. And there's actually one here that says, how does R&D and the patent box link? Dan, is that probably for you?
Yeah, I'll take that one. They don't. In effect, they're completely separate. R&D is a retrospective, if you will, tax incentive, whereas the patent's going forward. So yeah, HMRC allow both.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we've got another one for Mark here. You mentioned that there are passing off rights as well as trademark registration. Surely if I have passing off rights, I can take action against someone with a trademark registration?
Potentially you could. The question is whether your use predates the date of application for their mark. The problem is that if your use doesn't predate it, although you may have generated rights, they will have rights over you. And also you have a potential defense to an infringement action if you can establish that your use predates their first use and registration. And if you can establish passing off rights in that area, then you can continue to use. The big problem is that you're then ring fenced. So yes, if you've been trading in Ashford, you can continue to trade in Ashford in relation to whatever activities you're conducting from the date of their first use. But if you then want to expand to Orpington, you haven't got any protection. The other issue is that you're still left with the case of establishing it, and it's risky because if it comes to court proceedings, you're going to have to rely upon filing evidence to show that you had goodwill and reputation, and that's up to the court to decide.
That's really interesting.
The big thing is get a trademark application. It's not particularly expensive, and it will reap dividends in a lot of different respects, but also it will put you in a much stronger position if somebody else comes along and has been using the mark alongside you for a significant period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's often the hard bit about, isn't it? When people set up a business, I think cost can sometimes be such an issue that things like that get missed, or they get put on a to-do list and that to do, you know, things just bumping it down, but actually it's quite important to sort of prioritize that.
It's so easy. And look, we're all busy. It's a cost particularly when you're setting up a business. You tend to park it because you've got clearly much more pressing costs to get involved with. Yep, that's true. The danger is then if you leave it, it gets parked permanently because you've got always, you know what it's like in business, you've got 101 other things always coming along and you never get around to it. Well, the issue of the recruitment agency, that's a genuine case, and it just shows you, and I suspect when we got involved, it was after the event. And it's so sad when that happens, because you spend any small business owner spends an awful lot of time developing their business and spend a lot of time, and they develop goodwill if the business takes off and reputation. But if you don't have the rug pulled from under you, that's a disaster.
Yeah, and such a big distraction at a point that you probably don't need it. You know, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's so easy to turn things around, because, as I think as Paul's mentioned with other forms of IP, it's also an asset. It's something which is value, so that if, you know, depending on what your business, if you get to a stage where you want to retire, it's one of the assets that any potential purchaser is going to ask about. If you've got a trademark on your business, if it's the name of your business, you will have hopefully generated pretty good goodwill. But if you haven't protected it, that's going to be a worry to any potential purchaser.
Absolutely, really sound advice there. I think we've covered the questions that were in the Q&A. Did anyone who's still on the webinar, did anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask us quickly? Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything else coming in, so hopefully keen to sort of pack up now and end the session. So, but please do, anyone feel free to reach out to any of the panelists that have been on tonight if you've got any queries that you want to take sort of separate to the webinar. I know the guys are all really keen just to answer those queries and just help businesses where they can. So please feel free to get in contact with us. We will be sharing the slides and recording for any of you that want to watch it again. So we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.